Hi everyone, after a bit of an absence, a little bit out of my control, I'm coming to you with a video. Finally, apologies for that. I also, of course, missed the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, so I'll be dropping a couple videos about events and performances at the games. However, this video is going to be a very general overview of how the games went, how successful they were, and of course, a couple controversies. I won't be going into like super detail about a whole lot of things here, just a general kind of what happened at the games. So let's get into it. So firstly, I'm going to start off with who were the most successful nations at the Olympic Games. So of course, usually at the top, as usually always, the USA came out on top with 113 medals, including 39 golds. So this meant that they were the most successful nation in terms of gold medals and amount of medals won. China would come in second, although they believed that they came in first with a total of 88 medals, 38 of those being gold. And in a cool turn of events, host nation Japan came in third with 58 medals, and 27 of those were gold. Great Britain would come in fourth, and the ROC, or the Russian Olympic Committee, would come in fifth. Now I'm going to discuss some kind of positive things that happened at the games, including the addition of a lot of new sports and a couple of cool demonstration sports that was shown. Now, new events that have been permanently added to the Olympics roster are men's and women's 3x3 basketball, freestyle BMXing, and some mixed gender events. So this included team events in table tennis, shooting, archery, judo, triathlon, and relays in the 4x400 meter running and 4x100 meter swimming medley. Now, something I have said is that at the Olympics, there's always been room for improvement when it comes to gender equality at the games, specifically in regards to sports and events within those sports. So there are some events at the Olympics where only men are allowed to compete, and there are some events where only women are allowed to compete. So I think having mixed gender events is a really good step forward for the IOC and the Olympic Games. It allows athletes to compete together that don't normally get a chance to compete together, and it makes for a bit more of an exciting and more strategic event, especially for the relays. So I'm really excited to see what kind of other events they might throw in kind of a mixed gender element to them as well. The IOC also introduced a new rule where hosting nations get to pick a handful of sports to add as demonstration sports. And this year, the Tokyo Organizing Committee chose baseball, which is one of their national sports, softball, karate, surfing, skateboarding, and sport climbing. I do really like this new rule as it allows host nations to bring in maybe some more cultural sports, like for Japan, karate and baseball. But it also gives the ability for some newer sports that maybe don't have that huge international following or huge international presence to compete on this big international level, like surfing, skateboarding, and rock climbing. Now, the sport of climbing was probably one of my favorites. I really enjoyed watching it and the different elements of it, including the speed climbing and then the more technical stuff. I'd really like to watch more of that at the Olympics. Now, I know everybody's probably tired of talking about it. I know I personally am, but I'm quickly going to cover the effects of COVID-19 at the Olympic Games. Now, there was a lot of controversy initially before the games were going to start on whether or not they should go after being delayed a whole nother year and the world still being wrapped up in this pandemic as well. Now, it was either going to happen in 2021 this year, or it was just not going to happen at all with the 2022 Winter Olympics coming up. But also, you can't just keep delaying an Olympic Games that's already set up and ready to go before it's just all right, we either got to do this or we don't. Now, in my personal opinion, not necessarily based on facts, but sort of based on facts, is that money and the financial side was involved greatly in kind of pushing these games to go forward, because so money had already been spent on everything. It was either going to be used or it was going to be thrown away. I feel like they pushed for the games to be continued with maybe a little bit of disregard for the public health situation in Japan at that time, as they were seeing an increase in COVID cases. I do believe that money did kind of play a role in this, and I actually found a stat that it cost the country an additional 4.52 trillion yen, which is like 40 billion US dollars, just to delay the games a whole year. So at least with this kind of push to maybe run them, they would have made some money back, but not like a whole lot. So financially, this games was just kind of like a failure from the start when it initially got pushed back a year. But I do think money spoke a little bit louder as opposed to what the public opinion was at the time for the Japanese people. Now, as I said, in regards to the Japanese population, it seemed to be that they were overwhelmingly against actually having the games go before the games started. However, another poll was run for Japanese citizens asking them after the games whether it was a good thing that it was actually held. And 64% said that the games, that it was good that the games had continued, with 28% saying that it was not and should not have gone on at all, and the last 12% thought that it actually should have been held with spectators and should have just done the whole, just open it wide open. Along those lines, however, 55% of citizens did say that the games were not held in a safe manner in regards to COVID, whereas 38% said that it was. So they were happy afterwards that the games had gone on, but thought that they could have been safer. Essentially, overall, is what the statistics say. And I do believe that this kind of change in sentiment about the games from prior to them happening to after to them happening, or even during, was the fact that Japan was doing really well this games. They came in third as the host nation with the amount of medals. So I think that was one of the big things that kind of changed the public's thoughts on it. Now, although there were cases of COVID in the Olympic Village, it wasn't like a mass spreader event like many Japanese people feared it would be. There weren't a whole lot of athletes that caught COVID, as there were pretty strict health and safety regulations going on there. In regards to the amount of athletes who actually passed up the chance to go to the Olympic Games because of COVID, not a whole lot of them did. The majority of them were American NBA players who really don't need to go to the Olympics. They've already got enough of their own money to go, so whatever, good for them. Now I'm going to be discussing one of my favorite topics within the Olympics, and that is Russia, or what they were called at this games, which was the Russian Olympic Committee. In an earlier video, I have talked about how Russia, essentially the nation, or the idea of the nation, has been banned from competing in international sport due to the whole doping stuff. The whole systematic government state-sponsored doping system that they're running. So do I think the athletes should have been allowed to compete? No, I personally don't think that any Russian athlete or any ROC athlete should have really been able to compete at this Olympic Games. Yes, there is the whole argument that don't punish the athletes, punish the state, but everyone knew who they were. It didn't matter that they had boring uniforms or like didn't sing their national anthem. Everyone knows that they're Russian. Everyone knows that they're a product of the state, of the sports centers the state runs and everything. They're a product. They're gonna go home and they're gonna get praised by their government and they're gonna get money from their government. Like, really, you're just changing the flag and the uniforms. Like, that doesn't really mean anything. But regardless of like not having a bunch of athletes being able to compete, they still did incredibly well at this Olympics. They still placed 5th in overall medal totals. All right, so now for some leftover kind of bits and pieces. A big thing I think that came out of this was the reparation of Belarusian sprinter. I'm not even gonna try and pronounce her name. Her name is here. There you go. After she basically spoke out against her nation's government. Now, the Belarusian government has very recently been in a lot of tabloids and headlines due to their latest democratic election, which saw the current Belarusian president win 80% of the democratically elected vote. And for those of you who don't know, in a democratic election, you normally don't get someone who wins 80% of the vote. Which, this has obviously resulted in a lot of international issues. This has resulted in far more than 20% of the country coming out in protests. So she had basically criticized her nation's Olympic Committee after they were kind of making her do events or not making her do events, which resulted in them to actually attempt to force her back to Belarus. She actually talked to reporters and talked about how she was scared that when she would get home, you know, she would be imprisoned or fined or something. Eventually, though, the IOC was able to help, and they were able to get her access to a humanitarian visa from Poland as well. Along a similar vein to that, this was actually the first Olympic Games where it was technically illegal to do any form of political protesting at the Games, which I think is totally... So types of protests were allowed before games began, but they're not allowed, I guess, during games, during events, or on medal podiums. Now, so the protests that I saw were kept to a minimum. There was only a couple, however, one did stand out to me, and that was American shot putter Raven Saunders, who won silver at Tokyo for shot putting. Now, Saunders was on the medal podium and would raise her hands into an X above her head, which means the intersection of where all people who are oppressed meet, which is a very general and non-specific statement, which was probably thought a lot about. It's not specifically political, but it does have political undertones, particularly for the situation in the US. Now, the IOC were going to investigate this as a political act, but dropped the investigation when Saunders' mother died shortly after the Olympics. So they obviously didn't think it was that big of a deal to go through and investigate it. Now, what I think is very interesting is that the Belarusian sprinter was able to speak out, and the IOC helped her. However, an athlete who is winning a medal on a podium all of a sudden is doing a bad thing by doing some form of political protest, which is not necessarily fair. I do believe athletes should have the right to protest if they're standing on a medal podium, winning a medal, for whatever reason they deem fit. I don't really think it's fair, and I think it's a little bit hypocritical of the IOC to aid one person but condemn another for a political act at the Olympics. Now, overall, the games have been deemed to be somewhat successful. However, it doesn't really look like people will be looking into it too much, whether or not it was super successful, because of the struggle to actually just do the games and how the games went, considering delaying it a year, the COVID pandemic, not having any spectators, all of that sort of thing. So were they a financial success? No. And will probably go down as one of the worst financially successful games at the Olympics, just due to the cost of delaying it a year, not having spectators, increasing the health and safety, and then also not having any of that tourism money either. Now, there are lots of world records and new additions and new sports, which are all a great thing, and it really showed the kind of perseverance of a lot of these athletes to continue to train even though all of this stuff was happening. And it also goes to show that a worldwide pandemic cannot get the IOC down and not stop them from earning their money. So I hope you enjoyed this quick rundown of some things that happened at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. I'll be coming out with more content soon on the Tokyo 2020 Games and the Paralympic Games as well. And my next video will actually be my top 10 favorite moments from this game. So if you're interested in that, like and subscribe so that you can see it when it pops up. Thanks for watching. Bye.